Hey guys, I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC at BHSpringSolutions.com,
I'm Slav Barchev, BHSpringSolutions.com.
and we are in Sliven, Bulgaria. Actually, we're kind of above Sliven, Bulgaria, and a beautiful view from here, and a beautiful sunshiny day. And we got together for High Power University Session 101, and we wanted to do something special for Session 101 because not only is this the 101st High Power University session that we're making, it also is the 101st year since John Browning completed the predecessor handgun, which we most commonly know as the 1927 Grand Rendement, and that was actually, to the best we can determine, must have been completed around 1922. His patent application for that was issued in 1927 was applied for in 1922. So the 101, the 101st, has a lot of significance, and we decided we wanted to do something different for this session. And the session we have titled the High Capacity P35, and is capacity, specifically, is capacity still important today? And Slav and I decided to get together to jointly make this session because it is a topic today. It's a topic in the news, especially in the United States and also elsewhere. It's a topic that politicians struggle with, a lot of people struggle with, and specifically, is capacity still important today? So that's what we've got together for today, and is to really take on that question. This is a, you explain.
Well, this is my competition rifle. It is AR-15 Smith & Wesson MP15 Generation 1. There are some things done to it. Obviously, the iron sights are removed, and I'm using red dot sight with a magnifier, reduced angle grip, and lightweight buttstock, Jeremy Mikulek compensator. The idea behind this gun is to be as light as possible, as agile as possible, and in the lights of this topic today, the capacity, for my personal use, I'm using two types of magazines, if I can call it that way. This is the OEM 30 round magazine and 40 round magazine, which is perfectly fine for my purposes, and I don't know how you in the United States look at this as a possibility. I mean, if it's possible to carry a 40 round magazine in such type of rifle. I know that there are places where you can take the rifle openly in the society, in the streets, but I'm not sure if this is possible with a 40 round magazine. Is it?
Geographically situational.
Oh.
Depends on where your feet are standing.
That's not
at the time.
that doesn't sound very okay for me, because why should I be able to make this here and not in the other states?
It's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
And we've also got a couple of Glock pistols here of Slav's, and these are actually also firearms that Slav has been working on developing some advancements for. And that's not really what this is about, but this Glock here came with an original 10-round magazine. It has an extension on it that makes it 12. This one is an original 17-round magazine. It has an extension on it that makes it 21. So you could technically be 21 plus 1.
It's 22 plus 1, but I decided to go on the reliability side, so I carry it with one less.
21 plus 1, or so possible 22, 21 plus 1.
Yeah.
Okay. These firearms are relevant to our conversation today because there's a lot of movement towards limiting capacity, not just in rifles like this, but also in our handguns, and that does track all the way back to the origins of the high power pistol because it was the first to incorporate a double stack magazine and more capacity that started out at 13 or 14 rounds, and today we've got high powers that are loading up 17 or 17 plus 1. And so we wanted to cover this because we know the origins, especially on the handgun side, of higher capacity, when it happened and why it happened, but we wanted to get specifically to the question: is this still is capacity the subject? Is it still important today? We know it was important in 1922. It was important enough for John Browning to design his last patented handgun. And is it feasible to show this in the camera?
Yeah, I think so. It will be.
Yeah, we'll try it. We'll try it if
We'll
we can.
try it, yeah.
On the screen here,
one there on
you're
the
going to
left
see
is the
a couple of
1927
handguns.
Grand Remnant.
The one there on the left is the
1935,
1927
on
Grand
the right.
Remnant that became the P35. Capacity was
in the whole
it was
evolution
the
of this
critical
handgun.
driver, really, in the whole evolution of this handgun. And what we thought was we wanted to approach this. This subject has been so over-talked, I think, in the United States back, from the 90s when we had 10 years of 10-round capacity limitations nationwide, and we're still having this conversation today, and it's a very seasoned conversation. I think sometimes the tendency is it's possible to get numb with the whole subject because it's just been tossed back and forth between the two sides for so long. So we wanted to see what we could do about adding some maybe some little originality, a little imagination, and what created this idea is we hear John Browning was a genius. Well, he was a super genius. Well, there's a word that's above genius we don't know, and that was him. And all of those seem to have some valid reasons that those things are true. I have started to look at John Browning a little differently, that this guy may have had the most highly developed imagination that we can know of. We've heard stories that when he would go to some place socially, it would not be uncommon for him to wind up staring off into space, and he was mentally turning a mechanism or something, or a plan, or what have you.
Sounds like Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
More or less, I was reading his autobiography and it was similar.
Yeah.
Sorry for interruption.
No. So we wanted to look at this and also try to stimulate the imagination. And this is going to be maybe a little different approach, trying to stimulate listeners' imaginations in a similar way that John Browning was known for. But is capacity still important today? Possibly the best answer for this is if we look at the law enforcement model and how that has evolved, and just in my lifetime, and just in our lifetime. When I was born, I understand the common standard law enforcement loadout was a 6-shot revolver with 12 extra cartridges. So they were carrying around 18. And today we find we can carry around more than that just on board in the handgun.
In one magazine.
Today it's more common to have 17 plus 1 in a 9mm semi-auto, so 18-ish in the handgun. If I understand correctly, it's not uncommon for law enforcement personnel to carry 2 or more loaded 17-round magazines today, and some carry a third additional 17-round magazine. So this is now the 52 or 69 total round available for immediate deployment by law enforcement officers, and that's a big difference, a big advancement, compared to the 6+12 revolver model. And we have a history in the United States of our armed citizenry following the law enforcement model, and it's understandable why law enforcement has advanced their capacity and capabilities the way they have. It's understandable to a lot of gun enthusiasts. It's not fully understandable for some other gun enthusiasts, and it's fully not understandable without deeper explanation for most non-gun enthusiasts. And there exists what I have come to call a variable comprehension of reality dynamic, if you will, with regard to this subject. And this variable comprehension of reality dynamic is quite extreme. And that can make this whole subject less straightforward to answer. In answering what seems to be a simple 5-word question, is capacity still important today? Now, if law enforcement is any measure at all, it would seem to indicate that the capacity is more important today than at any time since its invention. And our goal of addressing this subject here as the 101st session of the High Power University is to reduce this degree of variable comprehension of reality dynamic that is associated with the subject of high capacity and the present day reasons that it is important, help the listener and the reader of this information better understand others who currently have viewpoints that are opposite. And this is hopefully where we're going to stray off of the normal talking points of this whole subject, because we're actually going to try to dig underneath and see what it is, get an understanding of what it is that folks who would want to limit capability and capacity of the armed citizen or law enforcement officers, frankly, and try to put ourselves, into a point of understanding more the way that they are understanding. There's an old proverb that I'm sure you've heard that goes, "Never judge a guy until you've walked a mile in his shoes." We're going to ask you to see if you can be successful at an imagery exercise with us. And I'm not going to ask you to walk a mile in anybody else's shoes, but I'm going to ask you for about 2 or 3 minutes to briefly use your imagination like you did for hours on end when you were a child. So we're not asking anything difficult here, but I do want to be clear and specific about exactly what you're going to be asked to do. And that is, when I say use your imagination, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination the same way you might have when you were 8 years old. So this is going to be entertaining, we hope, and a little bit fun. But you remember back when you were a child, when your imagination could just, run wild, and the daydreaming. That imagination could mentally take you places. And if you're like me, even maybe it took you to actual physical places sometimes. And my imagination had a habit of manifesting itself into my own imagined reality, and I vividly remember being Superman, Batman, the Lone Ranger with 2 silver revolvers, and a superhero of my own concoction, all on my bicycle, all over my neighborhood, all in the same day. And my 2 silver revolvers had this new at the time. I think you still buy these. They're little red rings, plastic caps, and they're pretty reliable. Better than the little paper ones were. And these were the ones that are about as loud as a firecracker. Much too much for mom in the kitchen. That would get you.
Get outside immediately.
Get you sent right outside. Yes. So, in those days on television, Superman was a 30-minute show every day, and the hour or two after that show, I could be found wearing. I had this old. It was a baby blanket, and it got safety pinned to my T-shirt.
No, it was a cape.
Cape, yes.
It was a
yes,
cape.
It was a cape.
It was a
It was.
It doesn't matter whatever anybody else will say, it was a cape.
So I would then be all over my neighborhood, jumping off of anything I could climb up on top of. And for the hour or two after that show, and then the Lone Ranger come on, and Tonto. And I imagined on my bicycle, my bicycle was my horse, and I had the 2 silver long barrel revolver cap guns. I had a belt with extra silver bullets in it, 2 holsters tied, around each leg. I had the mask, the white hat, even the tight T-shirt and pants, and the boots. And there are guys in the U.S. my age that just heard that, and I know I'm the envy. They just, by God, you had all that, right? So there was this one day where, I had done the Superman thing, then the Lone Ranger come on, and I had recruited my sister, who was 4 years younger than me, to go on a bike ride, and I was going to do my best to, with my own imagination, to imagine she's Tonto, right?
Uh-huh.
And so we take off, out through the neighborhood, and we're 2-3 blocks away from home, and recently before this, I had gotten bitten by a small dog, and it left a bruise on my leg, and my sister had seen this, and we had both got pretty kind of petrified at that age of dogs, and so we're riding, and we saw this dog on a porch, and the dog decided to bolt and come straight at us, and barking and snarling and all that, and we were both literally just very scared, and we didn't even have time we were speeding up, but we didn't have time to get ourselves out of trouble that way. And whatever reason, I pull out one of these cap guns and I fire it several times, and the dog changes its mind, and we just keep on riding. And that's my first recollection of remembering, I am so glad I did not load out in Superman for that bike ride, because we all know Superman did not carry a gun. That was a warm-up for the actual imagery exercise that we're going to be doing here just shortly. Now, I was one of two children, and I was the older, and
I was younger.
You were the younger, like
Yeah.
my sister. So you probably have a different recollection.
Yeah, my recollection is probably. I was also very much intrigued, and how is the English word for that? I was also the impression left by those heroes you said, Tanto and the Lone Ranger. Let me get back a little bit. I was growing up in a communistic country, so we didn't get exactly Tanto and the Lone Ranger. We had other heroes, but yeah, I was also imagining carrying a gun, carrying a rifle, and it was a stick. It wasn't like those silver long barrel revolvers we had. But my grandpa was a carpenter, and he did those things from wood for me.
Okay.
And it was really something special in the neighborhood, and because nobody else had this.
Did you have Makarov cap guns?
Makarov, no.
Okay.
The cap guns I had was a copy of some old detective Smith & Wesson revolver.
Okay.
A really ugly one. I don't know the exact model, but it was really ugly. But loud. It was as loud as ugly, but it was very ugly. And I was also drawn away from my mother, go outside, play there. Never mind, let's go back to the sibling thing. I was the younger one, and my brother, for whatever reason, decided that I need some kind of education, which he enforced. And
so you imagined being bigger than him a lot.
Until the moment I was bigger than him, yeah. I was imagining that. It doesn't have much to do with the current subject.
I think my sister imagined being bigger than me a lot.
I think this is a common thing among the younger siblings.
Okay, here comes the actual exercise that we're going to ask you to do now. Okay, so imagine you are a non-gun enthusiast, and you've never physically touched a firearm in your life. Now, you're good people, raised by good people, and I use words like capacity and capability, and you don't really understand what specifically we're talking about at all. And just for this next paragraph that follows this one, I'd ask you to imagine that my agenda is to get you to support decreasing the magazine capacities and capabilities of police officers, or take all law enforcement back to the 6+12 revolver model. So using your best imagination, stepping into the shoes of a fully non-gun person, hear the next paragraph. Bear in mind, this is a test of your imagination. Try to imagine and feel the images the paragraph paints for you. See if you can still daydream for a minute and get lost in the moment, like you did when you were childhood innocence. So again, I'm going to tell you a true story. Your job is to use your imagination, feel the images and the emotions while imagining that you are a non-gun enthusiast who has never touched a firearm, and my objective is to get your support for restricting bullet capacity in police officers' guns. Here we go. When you consider that today law enforcement is carrying 3 times to 4 times the firepower they carried 56 plus years ago, plus body cam, stun guns, pepper spray, plus more ammunition in a backup gun number 1, maybe even a backup gun number 2, retina burning flashlights, lasers, stick rifles with more ammunition, dogs, drones, rubber bullets, tear gas, flashbangs, armored vehicles, and helicopters, it would seem a logical and reasonable expectation that we're living in a safer society than we were 56 years ago when I was born, with all these kinds of advancements protecting us. Seems like simple math, doesn't it? It's math that would compute simply if we were living in a safer society today as a result. So is all that capacity and firepower really necessary? It was safer to live in Indianapolis, Indiana when I was born than it is today, and I'm really sad to say that. Law enforcement officers carried 6 rounds of ammunition in their handguns back then, and there were far less firearms in society generally, and 2, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department has had unusual numbers of unintended discharge incidents from their firearms, and too many instances of officer behaviors that are more than unbecoming. Back when officers carried only 6 bullets in his or her gun, in the summertime, most residents of Indianapolis slept with their windows fully open, and if there was a locked door, it was a light screen door secured with one of those little hook latches that was mostly to keep the stray cats and the mosquitoes outside, and so that the fresh air could move throughout the home all night. And thinking about it now, I can almost feel that breeze through that wide open window by my bed as a child. In the morning, sometimes the smell of the neighbors frying bacon coming through that window would be what woke me up. Can you imagine feeling so safe that you fall asleep restfully with your first floor windows wide open and the doors unlocked? It seems overwhelmingly clear that arming law enforcement with more and more bullets and capabilities has not made anyone safer. The result has been the opposite, and nobody has an explanation why. And as simple as all this is to understand, we need more people like you joining us to get the word out.
I almost imagine it.
Did you see and feel how fast that happened? Did you imagine the feeling of that fresh summer breeze on your fully relaxed being? Everything I wrote in that preceding paragraph is true. Nothing false, nothing exaggerated. I lived what I wrote there. That story contained some perception mixed with some nostalgia and emotions, some erroneous cause and effect work, and it creates a false perceived reality of the current real life. And no matter how warm and fuzzy and desirable the feelings created might be, relimiting law enforcement to 6 rounds of ammunition in their handguns really will not make it 1967 again. I agree with today's law enforcement model. Any objective risk-based assessment proves to me that today's capacities and capabilities are justified and wise, including additional magazines and backup number 1 and backup number 2 and tactical light and backup tactical light and stick spray stun, body cam, etc. We know that higher capacity in a handgun was important enough in 1922, 101 years ago, for such an invention to become John Browning's last patented design. But here's what's interesting about this. All the recounts of history seem to confirm that initially John Browning was not motivated or enthusiastic about designing a high-capacity semi-auto handgun. And this was what tweaked this whole subject for me, was because the subject of capacity today and limiting it is such a front page subject. But it was front page for John Browning in the late 19 teens, early 1920s. And initially, he didn't get it. Initially, he did not see the purpose or the reason why he should design such a handgun. So, but back in High Power University in the very early sessions, we covered John Browning's patent application for that.
Grand rendezvous, yeah.
For the yes, most people know it today, or most know it today, as the 1927 Grand Rendezvous, which was a handgun that was never mass produced, and this patent application reads like a designer who was deadly serious about this project, and it's not, the way the patent application reads does not read like something that a guy did not believe in. It read like something he fully understood why he was doing it, even though he didn't initially. And it was a rather short time that Mr. Browning moved or changed his position about the subject, and ultimately did design the first high capacity, what we would consider high capacity handgun today. And its introduction to the world in 1935 lives as one of the most noteworthy advancements in handgun history. Today we revisit the question, is capacity still important today? And by extension, what specific factors make it important today? And that's where we're at now in this presentation. Is we wanted to go head first at the reasons, the rationales, why this is such an important subject, why folks, legally armed citizens and law enforcement are very interested in having more capacity and more capability for defense purposes. So the first one that we just wanted to point out: has there ever been a time in history when there were more bad guys running around in concealed body armor? Now, folks, for folks who are non-gun enthusiasts that may be watching, body armor is something that stops your typical bullets from getting through to the body. Today, there's more bad guys running around with concealed body armor than any time in history. Limiting this to 10 on law enforcement officers or on legally armed citizens, it makes it very possible you could get deep into a 10-round magazine before you realize it ain't doing anything and going to have to choose a different target. This one dynamic all by itself should be more than enough to end this chatter about 10-round magazine capacity restrictions for law-abiding armed citizens. But any legitimate risk-based assessment should consider more than just one risk factor, though. Has there ever been a time when encountering multiple perpetrators has been more common than now, be that home invasion or carjacking or otherwise? And Slava, I'm going to tell you, this is where it starts to get offensive to me. And you remember when I wrote the book, Get Your Defensive House in Order, that's available at BHSpringSolutions.com. And you were good enough to go through and edit a lot of it. And one of the subjects I kept coming back to was this multiple perpetrator home invasion, or multiple perpetrator when you're not at home risk. And that today is more organized, is more prominent. We don't hear very much about, the 3/4 drunk old guy, that looks like the bad guy target at the shooting range, the mugger looking dude. That guy's not, up jiggling door handles, and this is not 50 years ago. There's never been a time where we see organization of the bad guys working together. Has there ever been a time when there was a higher likelihood that a perpetrator may be under the influence of something that directly and negatively impacts stopping power? And examples would be cocaine, heroin, opiates, fentanyl, and even alcohol, for that matter, is a significant barrier to feeling pain, and yes, it can impact stopping power. The implication here is that today the likelihood is much higher that a law enforcement officer or law-abiding armed citizen may need to stop multiple bad guys and whatever chemicals are present. Has there ever been a time when bad guys were better armed and with more capabilities than now? You have something?
I don't think so. The point you mentioned about the multiple perpetrators,
Mm-hmm.
I consider myself proficient with reloading. I can reload a handgun in under 0.5 seconds. I can reload a rifle in 1 to 1.2 seconds. And still, those 0.5 seconds for reloading the gun matter when you have more than one targets in front of you. Because I don't feel comfortable because I'm not shooting steel or paper targets, and this reload is not something that decides if I'm going to live or if I'm going to die on the street. And having only 10 rounds in the magazine is something that I'm going to be going along. I mean, I'm going to be a law-abiding citizen, like you said. But the guys who are attacking me, will they do this? Will they have only 10 rounds in the magazine? Do you think so? So I don't think it is necessary. I don't think it is right to add 0.5 seconds to my survival limits if I can go without it. Like if I can have
More on board.
more on board.
Yes. In the United
It's insane.
States, and maybe to an extent sometimes here in Europe too, but we've seen how protests can turn into riots that seem to just run down a rail all their own in terms of the resulting criminality and need for people to defend themselves. This is one, though, that when it starts to become this subject, and we all have to remember, it's only going to be the law-abiding who follow these sort of restrictions.
Exactly.
Have you seen some of the surveillance footage on YouTube that has filmed home invasions or coordinated attacks on police officers? And again, this is not the isolated crackpot. There are more instances of multiple attackers displaying some levels of coordination and indications that they understand things like cover and flanking. So for these reasons and more,
It's almost like a military unit is making room clearing. Everybody is knowing what the other guys are doing, and they're so coordinated.
it's a different subject, but
Scary.
there has been significant papers from the Pentagon that has specifically talked about this idea that our gangs are sending their gang members to the military for weapons training.
You mentioned that, yeah.
Reason that they're there. You can look this up on Google, and you will get the actual United States Department of Defense documents that detail this as being a bit of a serious problem. So for these reasons and more, capacity is more important today than ever before, and I do endorse the law enforcement model and the capacities and capabilities that are common today in law enforcement. But since I drive down the same roads and breathe the same air that our law enforcement does, and can have reasons to defend, the same reasons to defend that a law enforcement officer can have, and the reasons they are on the 17 plus 17 magazine program with all the rest of the capabilities. This notion of restricting, the law-abiding citizens are one thing, and the law enforcement, this doesn't apply to them. This gets very, very offensive to law-abiding citizens as well. The promotion of limiting the capacity of magazines of legally armed citizens has become a propaganda blitz, and more than just the political football it's always been. These are the same people who are trying to get creation of special driving permits in Indiana for folks who are in our country illegally. The same folks professing to want to end mass incarceration and at the same time pushing for laws that would make instant felons out of 20 million law-abiding Americans based on the kind of rifle or capacity of ammunition magazines that they own. And most shocking is that this is happening at a time when the threat risks that make capacity a logical and automatic priority have never been greater. I've noticed in my lifetime that every time something happens that has things really run off the rails, there are almost, when you look back, there were almost always warning signs in advance if we were, paying attention. And it's only after something has undeniably run off the rails that the question pops up: why wasn't somebody paying attention to this? As I was finishing writing some of these thoughts, it was almost mid-February, and in my paying attention, what I came to understand is that the United States has about 100,000 of its own military, uniformed military, right here in Eastern Europe. We're using F-22s to shoot down hot air balloons. While our own borders are so unguarded that the state of Indiana wants to join other states in collecting fees for special driving permits for folks who are undocumented, which undocumented does not sound synonymous with illegal,
Not
I guess.
at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
But when the investment to come up with this kind of a special driving permit is justified because the demand for it is so high. Wow. The federal government's debt ceiling needs raised again, and it's now April and it's still needing it. And in regard to the national debt, in the news story, nobody on the street could answer. Now this was cute. Regarding this story of the national debt, on this story, they were asking random people on the street if they could tell them how many zeros are in the number $32 trillion. And
How many are there?
nobody could answer it within 5 seconds.
12?
You created an automatic edit point right here. Oh. And most couldn't answer that question in any amount of time without asking Google. I wondered if anyone in Washington, D.C. could answer that question within 5 seconds, too. Now, it's no exaggeration that governments that get insolvent have problems paying their bills, including paying those who defend the country and maintain the rule of law. Could capacity of the armed citizen get important if that happened? We only have about 32 trillion reasons in the United States to be asking this question. I learned Indianapolis is on pace this year to set a new record for homicides again, and gun owners should be welcoming a 10-round magazine capacity restriction and a ban on certain rifles that will make everyone feel much safer. And what gives you and me the right to say anything about any of this? The fact that it may get even more necessary, that capacity may become even more important, is the reason why that right needs defended right now, is because life is just not a static environment. Here's what high capacity means for the law enforcement officer or the law-abiding citizen. Higher capacity implies commitment to defend in a more substantive way if necessary by staying in the fight longer. Decreased capacity can only compute to the opposite for the law-abiding armed citizen or law enforcement officer. And this simple math, decreased capacity for good guys, is simply the wrong direction entirely. That this led to was what could have changed John Browning's mind so much about this same subject that we're talking about 101 years later. And especially after there had just been a war to end all wars.
Presumably.
Presumably, yes. By this time, and I wanted to get a feel for what was going on, what was influencing during this time. John Browning, known to be of the Mormon faith, was famous worldwide as a master inventor. He was called the Master Lemaitre in Liège, Belgium. Also famous worldwide was the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923. His writings are known at this time in all parts of the world where English is written or spoken. In 1919, Yeats wrote a poem called The Second Coming. So Browning and Yeats, both famous and masters of their crafts, and I'd be willing to place a sizable bet that a Yeats poem around that time titled The Second Coming probably did not slip under Mr. Browning's radar screen. And I have no idea if Yeats influenced Mr. Browning's position about high capacity in 1922, but I can sure see how Yeats' poem could move my position 101 years later if I was opposed to higher capacity. Yeats' poem begins, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, and mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are filled with passionate intensity." It seems clear and it seems unmistakable that the actual threat risk need for higher capacity in 2022 was greater than it was in 1922. Beyond the statistical evidence, let's take one last look at Mr. Browning and see if we can learn anything about this. For a moment, we're going to do the imagery thing here one more time. And this might be a tougher one. The previous one was kind of a warm-up. Okay, this one might be a little more tough for you to imagine. So, if you can, as you go through this imagery exercise with us, I want you to really pay attention to the details. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the person we're describing here. And in fact, we're going to say this is first person. This is about you. And look at it that way. It's 2023, and I want you to imagine that you are really rich. And I mean a number like $75 million kind of rich. And your name is on the lips of people. You're recognizable. You're famous around the world. And it is no secret to anyone in the world that you must be loaded. Also, imagine that you continue to go where you want, when you want, like everybody else. You travel the world, you feel safe and secure with nothing more than maybe a little 6-shot 25 ACP handgun that'll fit in the palm of your hand. And you could upgrade your firepower, but apparently you don't feel any reason to do so. In the event you need to pop off a couple in the air to discourage an out-of-control vicious dog getting ready to attack you, you're covered. In your imagination, we just gave you the chance to experience a little smidgen of what it was like to be John Browning in 1926. We're told Mr. Browning's net worth was $4.5 million when he died, adjusted for inflation that computes to just shy of $75,500,000 in early 2023 dollars. Obviously, it's unimaginable in 2023 that you could be that kind of rich and famous and recognizable and have such a relaxed demeanor and posture about your own personal security or the security of your family. There should be no question that for the law enforcement and law-abiding armed citizen, the literal need for higher capacity is far greater now than when the concept was developed. It was worth inventing then, and it's far more important to retain higher capacity now. The movement to restrict capacity of the law-abiding armed citizen is careful to stipulate, usually, that these restrictions won't apply to law enforcement and certain others who use firearms in their usual vocation. But we're hearing cracks in this resolve too. Generally, though, we feel it's important for law enforcement to have higher capacity in their handguns. I mentioned earlier that we have a history in the U.S. of the law-abiding armed citizen following the law enforcement model, but as this question of restricting capacity on the law-abiding armed citizen continues, it would be legitimate that we don't forget that the movement to higher capacity in semi-auto pistols first happened among the private citizenry. And so this time, in the beginning, it was law enforcement following the law-abiding citizen model. And we should not let that fact slip away in history. Slav, is there any talk or movement here in Bulgaria about this subject?
I would say no. I would say no, but this doesn't mean that the situation here is brighter, because we are working on a much larger scale. We are not limiting capacity, we are limiting the ability of people to own firearms in general.
You also limit the ability to own the amount of ammunition that you own.
Yeah. If you own a firearm for self-protection, you're limited to owning only 50 rounds of ammunition for that particular gun. And if you're owning a firearm for competitive shooting, you are limited not to a certain round count, but you're limited by the training plan you have developed for this gun and for the number of competitions you have. But there is also an absolute number. I mean, if your trainer says you will need 5,000 rounds this year, you're limited to 5,000 rounds. You cannot buy 10,000. So there's also limitation that is created by the use of the gun. Undisputably, it is much better to own a firearm for competitive shooting, because you are allowed to have more rounds and the capacity is not limited by any means. But still, you cannot take this gun with you in the society. You cannot have it in your car. You cannot use it as a self-defense gun. You're not allowed to, and if you do, there will be fines. I mean, of course, you have done everything necessary to protect your life, but you will be fined in some way. I mean, either a financial fine, or you will be charged with removing the gun from your possession, and you will be not allowed to have any guns in the next 15 years. So there are different type of limitations here, and depending on the political situation in the country, this environment changes. And I have heard people saying that they are denied of getting licenses. I mean, they are applying for a license for carry, a license for self-defense gun, and they are denied without any reasonable answer. Why? I mean, they're just told that you don't need this one, you don't need to carry a gun, and they are denied this license.
That's we've had a lot of court cases over that kind of selective approval of,
Exactly, yeah.
of things like permits and carry permits and such. So, but it's interesting to me when you and I go to a shooting range here,
Mm-hmm.
and we buy ammunition, we shoot it up, and normally okay, I'm not a competition shooter, but if I lived here and I own a handgun and legally, and I go to the shooting range, I can leave with a 50-round box, but the person cannot sell me 5 boxes or
No.
a case of ammunition or like that.
You cannot leave the range with ammunition bought from there. I mean, if you buy a box of rounds, 50 pieces, you need to shoot them all in this shooting range. So this somehow keeps the equilibrium. I mean, if you have 5,000 round, if you have the right to have 5,000 round in your possession, and you want to shoot more, it's okay to shoot more, but you cannot own more. I mean, you go to a shooting range, you can, if you can afford it, you can shoot 10,000 rounds in that shooting range, you're good to go. But you should not take ammunition out of the shooting range, because this changes the round count you have in your possession, because this license is issued once. You go to the store, you buy the entire quantity, and you will need another license in order to buy more and have it at your possession.
I'm going to run this to a different subject real quickly, and you and I are suspected of having different kinds of conversations than other people in our industry sometimes.
You can explain that.
Well, how do I say? I don't want to point the finger at anybody, but there's lots and lots of companies today that are worried about selling everybody the next, wonder gun. And we have conversations about helping guys get the most out of the gun they already own, usually a lot of times. And our motivation is different. We don't have publicly held stock. We're not worried about stockholders and satisfying them and having them run our life and conversation. And
that's a very fancy way to say that we are doing whatever we want to do.
Well, sort of. And I do want to clean this up just a little bit. What we have actually done is we've designed and invented unique products that we first put into our own firearms, and then we shared it with our friends.
That's good.
And that's how this happened. One conversation that doesn't happen very much, and this is too bad, because the thing I noticed in the United States is this dominant media presence about exactly what the powers that be want the conversation to be about. So, there's another catastrophic, unfortunate mass shooting that happens, and all you can hear is the debate between restricting magazine capacity, taking these types of tools away from law-abiding citizens. And there's something that gets lost here, and you and I have had this discussion, I think, more than once in your car going down the road. And folks, to help you understand this, depending on who you listen to, Bulgaria or Romania is the quote poorest country in the EU, and depending on how it's calculated, I've heard both. And yet, I have sat with you as late as 11:30 at night in the city center in Sliven at a coffee shop, left and walked whatever it is, half, 3/4 of a mile, to our apartment, and by myself. And I'm not armed, and and nobody thinks anything about this. Nobody was worried about my safety. My wife wasn't worried about my safety. My wife walks home sometimes after dark, from her shop, and I don't get worried, and nobody else seems to get worried.
I felt more concerned. I cannot say that I felt in danger, but I felt more concerned in Belgium, in this big Brussels train station, than here in Bulgaria. It's just insane.
I've never been in a situation like we were in Belgium momentarily here.
And probably will never be.
And probably won't. Yeah, we when Slav and I go to Belgium to visit our chief weapons and modifications designer, Léon Hubert, we like to take the train from usually Brussels to Liège, and it involves a transfer. And if I remember right, I was really hungry or something, and it was like we had a few minutes to our train, and there's no snack machines, so we were like, is there a way out the door here, and so we found an exit to the train station, and this was late at night, 11 or 12, and we could see out the door. Across the street was like a little convenient mart store, and as soon as we opened this door to the street, we knew we were in a completely different environment that we were not prepared for. And I don't know what sort of engagement there was going on this street between people. But that's probably the most riskiest Snickers I ever ate in my whole life, because we actually did walk out, hustled across the street in the middle of whatever it was that was going on. But whatever was going on was evolving fast. It involved quite a few people, and there was lots of young males. And this was not Sunday school choir practice going on out in the street. We do know that. So I've never encountered that sort of myself in that kind of a situation in Bulgaria. When my wife and I get up when we're half the year here, and we watch the morning news, there's not a death count, there's not a body count, or a number how many people were shot last night. That's every morning almost in central Indiana about Indianapolis. So this is a big difference between the United States and Bulgaria in the terms of the number of violent use of firearms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gotten the United States worldwide attention, actually. There's and as I have just said what I've said, it could easily sound or be taken, I think, that Mark's Bulgaria is better, and it's not a better or worse kind of a subject at all. Some of the things that BHSpringSolutions has benefited, profited from most in the United States is just simply my ability to walk out my back door and test a spring.
Yeah.
Because that's what I do, and and it's out my backmost door of the house onto the patio, and there's about 2 miles of there's nothing but everything lands inside my property in the yard. But that would be possible here if I have a house in the country.
If you want to keep your guns, no.
If I want to keep my guns, no.
No, it's not allowed. You need to go to the shooting range and shoot with your competition or self-defense guns. And if you're a hunter, there are some regulations that need to be followed in order to go outside with the hunting company and start hunting in a designated area. You can also hunt alone, but this is only for predators like wolves, jackals, and foxes. And this is also regulated that you need to have a separate license for this, and it is up to you to be sure that there is nobody around you, that you're doing this safe. I want to throw something in the conversation about the gun violence here in Bulgaria. In the last couple of months, I think there were 2 instances when someone was shot and killed with a gun, and both of those were done by people who were not owning a gun. It was done with somebody else's gun, either stealed gun. It was not done by people who are legally licensed to carry a gun. And this is what I find common between Bulgaria and the US. You will always have the majority, even not the majority, 99% of the gun violence is done by criminals not having the legal right to own a gun. And with all the regulations you're providing, you're just limiting the capability of the rest of the legal carrying people to defend themselves, because it is absolutely known and it's absolutely certain that the criminals are not going to follow any regulations. So you're not limiting the gun violence, you're just limiting the people.
Okay. So I've mentioned to you that one of these days when you come and visit me in the United States, that we're going to get up and we're going to go squirrel hunting.
Yeah.
And that could happen because we look at the weather forecast, and it's it's going to be a nice morning at 4:30 in the morning when I like to go into the woods to squirrel hunt, right?
Uh-huh.
So we decide this the night before because the weather definitely is on our side. There's gonna be no wind and no rain, and it's perfect squirrel hunting. Maybe it's October, and so if we want to do like rabbit hunting here, this is possible, right?
If we are hunting like a hunting party, like a hunting company, yes. But
A hunting company.
there's a minimal amount of people that need to be taking part in this hunting company, and then you get the approval of the certain agencies here that you can go hunt on this day, and you can either hunt rabbits or boars or whatever you want. But if you will decide to go hunt rabbits and use firearms, this is not possible. We can do this with air guns, with pellet guns, but not with firearms.
Rabbits and pellet guns. Okay. So, in other words, we can't do here what I look forward to doing with you in the United
Nope.
States. That's not going to be happening here.
No.
Okay. All right. So obviously there are differences here that are incompatible with my lifestyle and preferences. So don't have any illusions that the comparison of things is for the purposes of casting any kind of judgment, or like this, don't like that, you agree with it. Not really. It's just different in how things are being handled. But back to this part of what we see our media and our politicians, the rails we see them running down after a tragedy, is what it is. It's changed very, very little. It's been rebranded and renamed, and the terminology is a little different, but it's the same old. And there's a missing element here that seems well enough documented at this point that it seems like something that should no longer be ignored, and that is answers to the questions: when we see these tragedies happen, what was this person running on? What was in their blood? What was the chemical makeup? What was going on that was impacting the judgment and the decision making to become or be what it was? And this seems to be a subject that is mysteriously missing most of the time. But in a very quick search, you can find a lot of documentation that seems to be clear that a high number of these tragedies that happen, there are typically psychoactive prescription drugs present. And this is one that I look at the presence of things like this as sort of almost like the presence of the right hormone levels.
Mm-hmm.
Because if your hormone levels are jacked up, it doesn't matter how much want to you have, you can't do certain things, or you can't stop certain things from happening, whatever the case may be, depending on what the imbalance is and how that works out. And we were having this conversation one day, and it sounds to me like the presence of psychoactive drugs, and specifically speaking towards the antidepressant class and the opioid class, are less prominent here.
You're correct about that. If I remember correctly, one time you said that for children that are going through the puberty, they are prescribed antidepressants,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
why it is just part of the evolvement of the development of the organism, and those are behavioral changes in the behavior that are normal teenagers.
Yes.
And if they don't experience them, if you remove this, if you remove the stage of their development, they cannot develop as a grown-up individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think this is right. I don't think this is doing anything good for the society in general.
My sister's a professional educator, teacher in Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
and she has recently shared with me something and some additional details that she's experienced herself. And it was the subject of this drug called Ritalin, which has been used for a very, very long time for hyperactivity in children.
What is does it make? I mean, it is calm down the.
It's a depressant sort
Uh-huh.
of thing that, you know, when you drug your kids with this, that it makes them behave, or I
Well,
guess.
it was much easier in the past. You just put your finger in the whiskey, give it to the child to lick it, and it's fine.
Well,
That's what was done here in Bulgaria. No, I'm dead serious.
I
here.
know you are.
The small children were given just this type of wine, red wine, homemade red wine, and they were sleeping like babies. I mean,
From the amount on the end of the finger.
yeah, they are small children. I mean, when I say small children, I mean 10 to 13 years old, when they
Okay.
need to be calmed down. Well, there's more natural ways in making children behave.
My sister, the specific subject that she was talking about was, she said, Mark, Ritalin and puberty do not mix. It is very, very bad. And then she started telling me some real life things, and I'm not going to go into that, but she's a very undramatic person.
Mhm.
And she has a master's degree and extremely educated, and I consider extremely rational. And about this subject, she is absolutely just, she knows what she has experienced. And this is the subject because it really bothers me as an American that we have the gun violence problem that we have nationwide in the United States. And I think everybody is naturally inclined to look for what's going on here, what is causing this. And because from all matters of logic, I should be less safe sitting right here than I would be sitting anywhere in the United States.
The worst thing that can happen to you at the moment is to be stung by a bee or
Stung by a bee?
Yeah.
It logically, it should be that way. So there has to be something going on in the picture that is not being addressed, is not being looked at in the manner in which that it should. This is the one that for me has become logical, if not conclusive, actually. That until in the United States we get a handle on what is running through our people's blood, especially when it comes with warnings that say that taking this could cause you to want to kill yourself or other people, you know, or if you start having suicidal thoughts, be sure to call your doctor. You know,
Yeah,
okay. Now, does this assume that somebody who's having serious, and I don't know personally, but serious suicidal thoughts, do you think they're going to feel like talking to their doctor?
I don't think so.
I doubt it. I mean, I don't know. Most cases, probably not. Until we get a handle on these chemicals that are known to make the margins go away between rationale and reason and just going off the edge, it's going to be difficult to understand what makes this tool different than every kitchen knife in America. What makes this tool any different than every baseball bat, billy club,
Whatever is
nail gun? you know,
Car.
car, yes. Um, it I feel like we have to get this conversation off of this, and get the conversation to this, and as responsible adults, and my goodness, if we all can't agree that when something happens that is tragic, that it is everybody's business to know what was running through that person's blood. It's the only shot, I think, that real people in real life have to recognize something that is going wrong in advance enough to intervene. The more you know, the better chance you have of being able to create an intervention if there is something that is, it seems, a high risk, that, you know, we got somebody here that's just not running right, you know, and it's starting to look not good. It's just, I've become a firm believer that we've got to get honest, regardless of what the pharmaceutical lobby wants, regardless of what the pharmaceutical companies say. This is more important than their profits. It's more important than their stock price. And it's not like I'm the first person saying it. There's been some incredible lawsuit awards involved with companies with this specific classifications of drugs, and it's not because things turned out well. It's because they hid things that were just very, very, very bad. So, folks, thank you very much for watching us, and we appreciate everything very, very much. And this has been the 101st session of High Power University. And on behalf of my partner Slav, everybody at BHSpringSolutions, and all personnel, and myself, Mark Allen, folks, thank you.
We're finishing a bit grim and dark gray, but it is a beautiful day. We're going to have a cup of coffee now, so thank you for listening and for being with us. Take care, guys.